Hi, Sean.
Hi, Dee. Hello, everybody else.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session on Substance Talk. This is our 5th episode. Sean, congratulations.
We're still learning. We're still learning. Long way to go.
We're still learning. It's good. It's good. As everyone can see, we have the nice background now, so things are going well. So on our 5th episode, we'll be continuing with motivational interviewing. This session, we have quite a treat for everyone, but it would be interesting. Sean, how's your sugar change, abstinence?
Yeah, my sugar challenge has been failed, I must admit. It lasted a few days, and then I think hot chocolate and cold weather took over. Trying to not eat too much refined sugar, though. So I've cut sugar out of my tea, and I've cut sugar out of some things, but not totally. So I failed a bit in that.
Well, you've made some changes, so
yeah.
Hopefully you'll proceed.
Harm reduction. Any change for the good is a change for the good, yeah.
Okay. So as everyone said, we'll be doing motivational interviewing, and I think we'll start with a brief background on what is motivational interviewing. Sean, can you please project that for us?
Yep, I can do that.
And as we are presenting this, guys, on the chats, everything, can you just give us a feedback on how your challenge is going? Would love to hear from you with regards to that.
Great.
So I think, Sean, this is what we actually did with the challenge. It's what a person wants, and we put on the you should make a change. And this is what a lot of substance users engage on a daily basis. You know, the clash between what a person wants and is capable of achieving versus to what we all assume.
Correct. And in most counseling scenarios, we know that being confrontational or directly oppositional doesn't really help people at all. It's not something that helps them, and it's much better to have a more kind of coaching kind of approach with people, and that's one of the things that motivational interviewing does. It helps you walk with the person rather than against them. So you listen to what they want, and then you can work with them, you know, summarizing, acknowledging, and that. I don't know if you've had any experience with this, Dee, in particular, but there are 5 principles to help us with this.
Express empathy. And I think the listening part, because we can't be empathetic to something we don't really take time to understand. So a lot of listening is required with motivational interviewing to really get it from the client's perspective.
Correct. Absolutely. Developing discrepancy is one of the more challenging ones. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then obviously avoiding argumentation goes back to the first point, which you don't push back against people.
You're rolling with resistance.
Exactly. I think those two are very similar to each other. There's slight differences. The rolling with resistance means that you're kind of riding the waves with the person and going with them. And we'll see some of that just now as well in one of the demonstrations. And yeah, and the self-efficacy, I think, is important as well. You know, we assume that often people aren't able to make any changes themselves, but there are small changes people can make themselves.
And just appreciating the fact that your client has managed to keep themselves alive and they are right in front of you. So there must be something they're doing fantastically well.
Correct. Yeah. To survive in today's world, any sort of progress is good progress. And these are the strategies on how to apply those principles and how to get the most out of it. You know, I think that most of us have a natural tendency to want to talk rather than listen. But in order to to really help people, you need to listen, and listen reflectively as well, and actively listen.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've found myself in arguments thinking what I heard is what I understood. Those are two different things. Reflective listening ensures that we're on the same page with a client continuously. So these are strategies that we use when we employ motivational interviewing, right?
Correct. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to see a demonstration by Stephen Rollnick from motivational interviewing fame and that. And I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second before we get back there. And in fact, Stephen obviously developed this, Professor Rollnick, and is really good at it. Now, this particular example we're going to see is not related directly to drug use. It's something different, but I think it's very worthwhile seeing how he manages to keep engaged with the person. There's a very brief introduction when he says something about motivational interviewing, and then we'll go into a short 5-minute demonstration of it. So let's have a look at that quickly.
I don't think it's the case that people are either not motivated or motivated. And in fact, motivational interviewing was born from conversations with very, very difficult people who were classified as not at all motivated to change and very resistant to treatment. Well, Mr. Smith, that's your medication sorted out.
Good.
Blood pressure's a little on the high side.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if I could raise the subject of your weight.
What?
I wondered if we could spend just a couple of minutes talking about your weight.
You are joking, aren't you? I mean, look, I've made time in my day to come here.
Yeah.
I'm kept in your waiting room for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable. You know,
Yeah.
if I make an appointment with
Yeah.
a client for 10, I expect them to start at 10, not quarter to 11.
Right, and so you're busy enough. And
Yeah, I've got other things to do. I've got
Yeah.
accounts to do. I've got clients to coming in.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily easy for you to make the time to come down, and you had to wait in the waiting room. And now I raise the subject of weight.
Yeah,
just
I mean,
when you're
okay,
thinking
fair
of
enough. I've got to have my blood pressure
Yeah.
medication changed, but I
Yeah.
really haven't got time to talk about my weight. I mean, you know, I'm aware of my weight, I'm aware of the problems, and I'm also aware of the solutions.
Right.
So I don't really need a discussion. It's just I've got too much to do at the moment, you know?
Right, and so it's been a bit of a rush for you coming in.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry about the wait in the waiting
Well,
room.
it's bad form, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's not easy for you because you'd like to go really soon, and here I am asking you to spend just a couple of minutes with me.
Yeah, but basically I've got things to do. I've got to
Yeah.
get back to the office. I've got a pile of work that I've got to deal with.
Yep.
And every moment out of my day means I have to work in the evening or weekends.
It counts.
Or when you're self-employed, you haven't got a choice,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. It's up to you. Just a couple of minutes.
Well, I'm here now, so yeah, okay, if it's a couple of minutes, yeah?
I promise.
Okay, because I really must get on.
I want to simply ask you how you feel about it.
About what? What, losing weight? Well, obviously, I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't? I mean, I'm aware that I'm over my balance weight, but I know that it's causing problems. I mean, obviously, I get out of breath if I have to do something a bit hurry, and I realise that I'm on this blood pressure.
Right.
And maybe that's probably contributing to it.
Right. So you can see the links between your weight and your health, and you'd like things to be.
Yeah, I mean,
better.
there are other things, but I mean, yeah, the weight is a something I would like to get hold of. You get the handle on. You know?
You'd like to if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I know the theories of a bit of exercise on a regular basis, a balanced diet. But unfortunately, because of my lifestyle, because of being self-employed as an accountant, it's finding the time to exercise, but also finding the time to sort of think, okay, I'm going to go shopping for this, that, and the other, and then I'm going to prepare a meal.
Yeah.
With me, it's very often
ready meals and that sort of thing.
Yeah, food on the run, grazing.
Let me see if I can summarize what you've said, and then we'll see what next. You lead a busy life.
Yeah.
You run a business and you've got a lot to do.
Yeah.
You're aware of the links between your health and your weight, and you are concerned to some extent about that. And ideally, it sounds like you'd like to do something about it. It's just that your life is busy and rushed, and you tend to use convenience foods in order to get the work done.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, because of my lifestyle, food is just fuel.
Yeah.
Because I'm juggling all these balls and I don't want to drop any.
I get it. And so if you could fit it in, you would like things to be different, but that's not so easy.
No.
Okay. Can I suggest that you come back and see me in a couple of weeks' time just to chat about this?
Okay, I'm up for that, but it's going to be the same problem of A, finding time,
Right.
and B, if I make an appointment,
Right.
I don't expect to be kept waiting for half an hour
Exactly.
or whatever, because it's...
Exactly. I'll tell you what might be a nice solution is if you come down first appointment, and I give you an appointment at 8:30.
That'd be good.
Then there'll be absolutely no waiting. And the purpose of that visit will be to have a look at how you really feel about how you could move forward and somehow fit in a more healthier lifestyle into the busy work life that you've got.
I'll maybe have a look at my schedules, see whether
Yeah.
anything can be arranged, or I can pass something on to some, and so that so it's not a wasted interview.
Yeah.
So I can come here and say, okay, I've looked at my schedules, I've looked at things,
Good.
whatever.
Good. And see if you can fix it up and also give some thought to what we've talked about.
Yeah, of course.
Good stuff. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, all the
Sorry I went
best
off a
then.
bit.
Glitches in presenting, I discovered that every single time I touched any button on the screen, it would pause the video as well, which was obviously a bit of a problem. So that was an example of Prof. Rollnick working with somebody who was particularly difficult, didn't even want to speak to. Prof. Rollnick was doing there. He was very much rolling with resistance. He was agreeing with the person first before he was pushing back against them, and eventually got them to agree to even consider looking at a future appointment and coming in again. So keeping the conversation going, keeping the engagement going. In the next interview, which was a conversation I had with Professor Rollnick, I start off by speaking about an incident that happened when I was confronted with a very antagonistic group of people. So this was a bit like motivational interviewing for quite a big group. But let's have a look at this next interview, which is about 20 minutes long to half an hour long. And then at the end of it, we will quickly wrap up and then continue with the next week, specifically with motivational interviewing for people who use drugs. So I'm just going to share my screen again with you. And sorry, just let me make sure that I'm sharing with sound. Okay. There we go. So Stephen Rollnick, Professor Stephen Rollnick. It's great talking to you, as always. As I said to you, this conversation some of it is going to be shared with the group in the substance talk sessions that we have at the University of Pretoria, the COSA program. But we will just talk generally at this stage. I'll ask you a couple of questions and go forward and see how it works out. One thing I wanted to start with actually is a personal experience I had the other day, and I wanted to get some input on it. And don't hold any punches if I've got this wrong, but I had a situation where I had to go into a meeting with 11 community policing forums. And these are, you come from South Africa originally, you may or may not know, but community policing forums are a bit like your neighborhood watch, but they're legally mandated and they work with the cops in the area. So when I went into this, in particular, they were complaining about the needle and syringe programs that we were offering. And saying, oh, you know, people are dumping needles everywhere and all the rest. And a lot of it was a lot of moral outrage without looking at things. Now, this is not about the meeting, but what it is I was terrified of going into that space and making the situation worse, because the downside is they could stop the program totally, even though it's illegal to stop it. It's been done before in the country, and a lot of people could suffer because of it. So in thinking on how to prepare about it, I thought about the principles of motivational interviewing, which typically people don't apply to a group scenario or even into their personal relationships.
Yeah.
And so I focused, first of all, on the thing of expressing empathy, finding the points of commonality, the things that we can agree on. Now, obviously, in a therapeutic setting, you're not going to get as personal as in something like this, but you certainly want to connect with the person and express empathy. And then I used the other techniques, rowing with resistance, avoiding argumentation, the principles rather than, and then the strategies of obviously reflective listening, encouraging change talk, affirming change talk, not pushing back against non-change talk and that. And it went really well. I started the thing by saying, look, nobody likes needles in the community. Nobody likes it, let's face it. Anyway, we went on, starting from that point, we had a lot of discussions about the possible solutions and that. The one thing that I found quite interesting was the point of developing discrepancy, because I know you and I have discussed this before, and that is something that can be well wielded a bit like a hammer, you know, like especially say a pregnant woman using drugs. You can say, so on one hand, you're saying that you want to look after your child, but it doesn't seem so on the other hand because you're still taking drugs. You know, it can be quite punitive as well. In this particular case, I had a guy stand up and he's, look, we've had this discussion 4 years ago. We were in the same place having the same discussion and nothing's changed. And so I thought, how do I handle this? I said, well, actually, you're dead right. Nothing's changed. We've continued to deliver services, and I'm paraphrasing. We've continued to deliver services, and you've continued to harass the people who access services, to take away their needles and syringes, to be punitive against them, to chuck them into jail, to ask the police to remove them. And that's so nothing's going to change unless we find a new and common way of solving this problem. Now, that was, for me, a bit of discrepancy building, but also kind of avoiding an argument, direct argument, because anybody in the room could see that they had done nothing and we kept doing what needed to be done. And that was a groundbreaking moment. Now, my question is, has it been looked at, motivational interviewing, looking at it in a broader context with groups? And I must just preface this by saying, I feel a little bit wary at times, because it's almost like I've got a superpower. You know, it's if you take these principles of motivational interviewing, people and groups do shift. And almost using it in a personal relationship might seem a little bit manipulative if you're concentrating too much on it. So I just wanted to find your feedback on groups, and then is motivational interviewing a bit like a superpower in some ways?
Hell, that's quite a question. What an amazing story. I mean, what struck me most was how you had these constructive experiences and conversation with a group in quite adversarial kind of circumstances. Wow. And that it would be a great pity to lose those experiences. So, like, as your buddy, I want to say to you, for God's sake, Sean, write down what happened or capture it, because it sounds to me like the front end of innovation, in the sense that while people have worked on MI in groups, it's usually in more circumscribed therapeutic groups or groups for people with diabetes or whatever, where it's in a way a bit easier to contain the conversation, if you like, in a constructive way. This sounds right out there. I don't know about developing discrepancy, but I do get quite a strong impression of something incredibly constructive happening. And is it a superpower? God, I don't know. I think there are ways of handling groups that can transform them. And you've certainly had an experience of that happening. And I know you're too modest to imagine that like this is going to change everything. But still, there's something quite substantial happening in that group. It sounds also like you had this like awareness of the principles of motivational interviewing, like in you there. It sounds also like you didn't try and be too clever, that you allowed those principles to play out. Just in those little moments when someone said something, you're probably going, okay, I'm not going to say this, but maybe this is helpful. And your decisions about what was going to be helpful were strongly guided by motivational interviewing. So it's a bit of a puzzle because we can intellectualize about motivational interviewing, but actually this was mediated through you, Sean. So it's as much about you and what you did as a human being and your authenticity, with motivational interviewing coming into the slipstream. That's how I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so
Yeah.
that leads nicely into another thing. I remember when we had the podcast on motivational interviewing in substance use disorders and addiction, which I strongly advise people to go and look because it was a really interesting conversation that we all had. And one of the questions were, or one of the main premises of the discussion were, what does motivational interviewing, or what has motivational interviewing brought to the field of addiction? And my answer was, I felt the biggest thing it had done was change the way or the thinking of the people dealing with people who use drugs. So when you applied the principles of motivational interviewing, even if it is initially in a kind of semi-robotic kind of way, and you're using it as quite a rigid framework, you are changing your interaction with the person. And as that works and you see it work, you become more relaxed into it and you're using it more consciously or subconsciously as well. But there's more consciousness in the using it, but also it becomes easier, almost as if you're not having to think about it all the time. Now, I think it might have been you and I that had the discussion about coaching as well, and certainly I've heard it said that, you know, a coach, when you've got an absolute star who's a natural at it, they really need a coach not to correct their technique but to affirm certain behaviors and to encourage them to think a little bit further. And similarly, in a therapeutic setting where you've got somebody who's a natural, they maybe don't need as much rigidity as somebody else. But one of the questions that was always asked me is, what do you do for people who could potentially do harm? And my feeling was that motivational interviewing gave a nice framework to kind of cut back on the potential for doing harm, because you've always got somewhere to go to. In your experience, have people fed back to you that they find themselves changed from as a therapist when applying motivational interviewing to people without the intention of changing themselves?
Yes, including myself. Definitely, I can happily start with myself if you're interested.
Of course.
And I think it's the beauty of it is that you find yourself stripping away things that are less helpful and potentially very harmful, like blaming, labeling people, trying to jump in and persuade them about persuade them about the wisdom of taking a particular direction. Those kind of habit patterns, conversation habit patterns, and they're reinforced, as we know, as you described it beautifully in this story you opened with. Those that they can be reinforced by the system around people. So just being released from that, okay, not saying and doing a whole lot of things, and connecting with someone as a person first, first and foremost, this is a human being I'm connecting with. Somehow motivational interviewing has allowed people in the addictions field to put on those lenses. I mean, I don't mind if anything else does it. You don't need motivational interviewing. But the fact that it's allowed people to put on a different lens and look at people as people in the first place, strip away all the other bad conversation habits, and healing happens. And sometimes that healing can be brief and natural. And certainly the conversation, Sean, if you see it written down, it's very natural. It doesn't sound like some specialist thing, which is the beauty of it. It's a very simple, natural conversation about change. And so that personally, I found the thing that had the biggest impact for me was that stripping away, which included stripping away cleverness, because I'm a psychologist and I used to think that, you know, if I'm only clever enough, I can help people solve problems. Yeah, so I don't know if I'm being helpful here, Sean.
No, absolutely. That's very helpful. And yeah, I find it fascinating, the story of motivational interviewing, because from our discussions, one of the things I've realized is that you are moving more towards trying to not simplify. Yes, it is actually simplify, but not overly simplify. To reduce motivational interviewing into something that can be applied in almost any circumstance where change is desired or necessary or whatever, or to help people change. And the others who maybe want to overly complicate it and or in their opinion, obviously not overly complicated, try and become more precise and make it more academic, should I say. I think there's places for both of those, but am I correct in assuming that you really want to almost make it democratized, if for lack of a better term?
Yeah, that's completely right. And as you say, there's a place for both kind of activities, if you like, you know, trying to understand the detail and exactly why and what the evidence suggests, and it can be useful. But I guess my mission, I wasn't altogether conscious of this when I took motivational interviewing, for example, from addiction to healthcare, which happened pretty close to the beginning when I first met Miller in 1989. It was like on the outer fringe, because we were specialist psychologists working in the addictions field. Then that developed its own momentum, too complicated in my view. But that took me a couple of decades to realize, or more actually. And then, as we know, people have tried to use motivational interviewing in a wide range of fields. And then personally, for me, the journey's been more recently, the last 5-10 years, into the world of school teachers and now sports coaching. And I guess there's a call for humility here on my part, which has been, I suppose, part of the revelation, is stripping away the professional arrogance that can sometimes drive one to being what you could call a clever dick, you know, where you get a lot of professional, you know, kudos and that sort of stuff from developing more and more specialist stuff from this simple observation, okay, which is that when I went into, for example, classrooms and as I am now on the side of sports fields, this stuff happens naturally. Okay, so that's a cause for humility, because what we see in good motivational interviewing is actually happening out there sometimes with some people, okay, and they've never been trained in it. So what's going on there? And my feeling is that there are fundamental helping processes and conversations which we've got to describe simply. There's no need to make it complicated, that are happening naturally, and they're a lot like motivational interviewing. And so the question is, what can we offer? And I've kind of answered that for myself by saying, we help people be conscious of what they're doing, okay? Because sometimes they do it naturally, but they're not conscious of it. And it's the very consciousness of what you're doing that helps you get better at it. okay, which any good sports coach will tell you. Working on it, working on the skills, trying to improve, noticing, being more observant. So you're not just being authentic and natural, which is critical to constructive conversation, but you're noticing, and you're noticing the impact of what you say on people, like you described with your group. So Miller, I've persuaded Bill Miller, I suppose, in a way. We're writing the 4th edition of our textbook as we speak. And I've been passionately calling for, let's keep it simple. I think there's a bit of a risk with 2 clever psychologists and a publisher who wants a textbook. So it's going to be more complicated than it needs to be. But yes, I think it's essential to describe things in simple terms, in simple jargon-free language, because it is out there. So what's the point of overcomplicating it? You know, it's to use a sporting metaphor, Johan Cruyff, the wonderful football player and football coach in Barcelona, he always used to say something like, football is a simple game. Yeah. You translate that into the worlds of helpful conversations. Playing simple football is one of the hardest things to do. So the fact that we can say, look, this is simple. Strip away the prejudgments and the prejudices and your aspirations for the person and treat them as a human being who's got the energy inside them and the wisdom inside them to make a better life for themselves. That's like MI, if you like, or it's simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy to do. And you've got to look inside yourself as a human being and say, what do I need to get rid of in order to really look at people in this way? And honestly, it's taken me decades, but that's because I was a clever dick. As I say, I was far too much of a clever dick. Some people take to it naturally, okay, because they're right there. They're right there. They're right there. They're free of prejudice. And so, yeah, it's easy to learn, and people do have these transformative experiences learning MI. And I think that's because most of the good stuff is already inside them, as I believe is already inside any client or person with struggling with substances.
Yeah. Okay. So you said something there, just backing up a little bit, that was really interesting to me. You said some people naturally do well at this because they're naturally free of prejudice, which is a profound statement, actually, because on 2 levels. First of all, it accurately describes the visceral response that most people have towards somebody sitting in front of them who's got a problem with drugs. There's even with the best intentions, there's often a prejudice because there's a lot of assumptions. So that was the first thing that came up. But then the other thing is that what we've been discussing is this almost becomes a framework to help you or an individual reduce the level of prejudice and how that is going to influence the therapeutic process, because you're thinking about that. So that's tremendously powerful.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the great reasons for or benefits of teaching motivational interviewing and practicing motivational interviewing in an academic setting or in a training setting is that it helps people to be present and to think about people more than to think about the prejudices that they've got or the stigma towards that particular individual, or see them as a human being, not as a label, which is tremendously transformative. I remember listening to somebody who once listened to a lecture of yours, and they say, "No, but this is motivational interviewing is just what we do anyway." And I said to them, "But if you were just doing it anyway, wouldn't you have better outcomes?" And I don't think, people seem to think that often, yes, I'm already doing this, but most of the time they're not. And as soon as they start being self-aware, and I think the motivational interviewing principles and the strategies help somebody become self-aware of these things that are helpful and less helpful. And that self-awareness is critical. And that brings me to the next point that I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about, is what I find really interesting is that motivational interviewing has translated well into multiple areas of study. And one of the things that I found fascinating is in a lot of examples in that, you don't need to know much about drugs at all to be able to use motivational interviewing in the conversation. Whereas in most fields, I see they want to teach you about all the different kinds of drugs. You need to know the classifications, this, that, and you come into the room with all these preconceptions and you sit down in front of the person and you almost become like intent on showing that you know as much about drugs as the person using them, you know, and I'm using the word you, not as you, but people in general. Whereas if you've got a background in motivational interviewing, you can walk into the room and have somebody that you don't know what drugs they're using, you don't know what's going on in their life, but you can focus on the here and now and them and be present and still help them, even if you haven't got a clue about the drug that they're using.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've definitely found that because they teach you. You ask them, they teach you about the drug. You know, Sean, sadly, very, very sadly, because of this illusion or delusion that you need to be an expert in substances in order to help someone, harm is being done, in my view. Okay, when I hear about, listen to, or read about the experiences of people in some countries, there's a sophisticated assessment process that people go through. By the time they through that sophisticated, expert-driven assessment process, they're more or less lost.
Yep.
Okay. And the dropout rates are things to be ashamed of. And I think harm is being done. I would add, I've got one point to make about what skillfulness in MI is about, but I don't need to make it now. But I fully agree with you. If you connect with the person first, show some humility in learning about their own experience with drugs, which will be informative for sure, a time can come when you can share expert knowledge with them. So I'm not arguing for alcohol and drug people to not worry about knowledge. Like, you know, I'm not saying that at all. But there's a time and place for sharing, for offering your expertise, not dumping it on them, imposing it upon them, needing to assess before you can treat. And I mean, I really think we've gone down the wrong road there. But a time can come when you can share your questions and puzzles and expertise with them, if that's what they want.
Yeah, exactly. If that's what they want. And once the trust has been built in that, and perhaps not expecting them to tell you their deepest, darkest secrets in the first 10 minutes of the session, which I find quite bizarre. It would be seen as perhaps sort of slightly personality disordered in some cases, but when it comes to drugs, it's seen as lying and denial and
correct. I mean, that's where MI started for me personally, actually, in Cape Town.
Yes,
totally. In a treatment unit in Cape Town in 1976, a guy walked out of a group and topped himself. Right? I didn't say anything, but you know, he didn't say anything. I didn't say anything to him, but you know, he was just absolutely gutful of being told he was a bad person and full of denial and stuff. So I say that with some passion and self-disclosure there, but it did all start for me in South Africa. I want to still make one point about motivational interviewing, and I'd be worried if we stop this without making it.
Sure.
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I go for it? See if I can do this in just 2 minutes. Look, everybody can kick a football. So, of course, if people say, I do this MI all the time, of course, everybody can kick a football. Skillfulness, I think this is, if you like, there's two aspects to this. One is connecting with a person and empathizing with them and showing them to empathize with them, and it's healing in itself, and it runs right through. Okay. But there's another aspect to this, which is where the skill comes in, which is not just kicking a ball anywhere you like, right? Which is that we've used the word evoking, and I've encouraged Miller to try and change that word, and we're trying to change that word, which is where your focus is on their healing and their future journey. It's a deliberate, purposeful focus on what's going to be helpful for them to heal. So it's not just, MI is not just about listening to people and cozying up to them and empathizing and being warm with them and thinking that that's going to heal in itself, which it can, and it does. But that doesn't make it MI. Yep. And this is the one justification for keeping a hold of MI. Otherwise, I would say we can just chuck MI out and talk about good listening practice. But MI is more than just good listening practice. It involves a focus on the future and on the wisdom inside the person and any expertise that you can offer, not just to firm up their commitment to changing, but to having a constructive conversation about how they might do it, about what does a plan look like. And MI is often caricatured. I think we started this, we made the mistake in the first place, is MI is just about helping to build someone's motivation. I think helpful conversations about change embrace not just people feeling stronger and more motivated, but also developing clarity about what the hell they can do about things, which is planning as well. So I just wanted to make that point that MI is not just about cozying up to people and listening. It's got a purposeful function, and it's the equivalent of skillful football.
Yes.
Like, so it's not just kicking a ball, you know. Yeah. It's the way you use this ball and the direction.
There's a goalpost at the other side, and you want to get it past the line. You want to get it past the line. Otherwise, it might as well just be a friendship and not a therapeutic process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an important journey for people to go on, because it's very delicate. Somebody is wavering, they're not sure about their commitment, they're not, you know, and then they get close to the edge of thinking and feeling like, I want to do something about this. Then they back off, then they change, then they fall down again. And you know, it's delicate, and my advice to you good folk out in South Africa or anywhere would be, don't try and solve this by being clever. Ask the person, notice, observe, be gentle on yourself and them, ask them what's helpful. Don't leap in with solutions without carefully asking them what sense it makes to them. Sorry. Okay. End of rant. Sorry, Sean.
No rant at all. That's fantastic, and it helps sort of wrap our discussion in the fact that this is a purposeful thing. It's not a random chance kind of thing, and that was purposefully developed over decades to become something that could help you in a situation where somebody might be feeling suicidal, and that you can actually not have that confrontational discussion that drives a person to that point, that maybe we're moving towards a more compassionate and yet still directive way in helping people.
Exactly, Sean. It happened to me last week in this Oak Woodland that I manage, where somebody was helping me in Oak Woodland, and I got wind of the fact that he was in the emergency unit because he tried to hang himself. Okay. And one thing led to another, and we sat on the grass in the sun. Okay. And that was a very powerful moment for both of us. I felt very privileged to be there. There we were just sitting on the grass, but I felt like there was a whole human life there for us to preserve, to be honest. Okay. And that connection that we had, and that moment of considering why and how he might, I don't want to say move forward, because he wasn't quite there, just make some sense of life so that he could get up the next morning. It was like that. Didn't take long. It was very delicate. It didn't take a lot of money or time, so to speak. It's just been text between him and me since then. And this morning I got a text saying, yeah, I've been dry for a week.
Wow.
You know, so I think that's the simple stuff. It's not complicated, but I had to be very watchful sitting in that grass of the privilege of holding a human life between us and of paying very careful attention to what he'd been through and how he might move on. So it's not complicated, you know what I mean? But it can and does save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's was your original goal. And I think you obviously realizing and seeing the fruition of that, which is a wonderful thing, you know, to be able to do that. So we're certainly grateful that you've given us MI. And it's amazing that it needed the work of you and Bill Miller to codify or to bring into general knowledge these or specific clinical knowledge as well, these gifts of how to communicate with people, because surely that would be the starting point. And obviously the predecessors, Carl Rogers and the theories of change and all the rest contributed towards this. But I think that there are few interventions that have proven so robust and most importantly haven't caused harm. I think more than 1,500 randomized trials. So yes, thank you, Steve. And
No problem,
we appreciate you giving us some time to us, and your friendship is truly appreciated. And so Stephen Rollnick. Okay. So that was Professor Stephen Rollnick in conversation with me. Sure if there are any questions or comments quickly towards the end before we start wrapping up for today, and then introduce you to something, some new initiative of ours. But yeah, any comments or any information? Dee, what was your impression of it?
That was, wow. Because you can see he loves what he's saying. So humble also. But yeah, I can imagine. That friendship is awesome. We have Mpo, who says, when conducting MI, who has the power and who must be the expert? And what are the experts needed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So typically in any kind of counseling situation, the feeling is that the therapist has the power, but MI actually sort of equalizes that equation quite a bit. The objective is that you collaborate, and in a true collaboration, some people have some expertise and other people have other expertise, and the power is evenly distributed. So the interesting thing is how often clinicians feel that they have a right to speak from a position of power, which is not necessarily helpful, and people feel that condescension and that they're being judged in those conversations, and that's why MI is particularly powerful. I was in an interesting talk on developing the theory behind MI recently, and one of the people who's an expert on various things seemed to feel that the client had all the power in most therapeutic relationships, because if they don't change, it makes the therapist look like an idiot. But I've got a problem with that conceptualization, because we should not be taking responsibility for another person's change. We can facilitate and we can assist, but what we shouldn't be doing is claiming responsibility for the change or claiming to be the agent of change. Because if we're going to claim to be the agent of change in positive outcomes, we've got to claim to be the agent of destruction in negative outcomes, and that's obviously not a comfortable place for most people to hold, and an incredible responsibility that I don't think any clinician should be holding. So So I think the power balance should be equal, and I think that MI helps equalize the power balance.
Thank you for that. I think our final question, because we are over time, is how do I know that I'm actually practicing motivational interviewing, and how can I improve?
Next week, we will be talking about that specifically, and we will be giving you some tools for that as well.
Fantastic. Awesome stuff's coming up. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for bearing with us. I know we're a bit over time. Enjoy the rest of your day. The next session will be 2 weeks from now, on a Wednesday.
Right.
But we'll share all of that. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.